Welcome back to History for Hours. Tonight, we move through the quieter corners of New York's underworld, where deals were whispered, not shouted, and power came from patience rather than rage. This is the world of Joseph Lombardo, a man who survived not by being the loudest in the room, but by understanding timing, loyalty, and when to stay invisible. Most people couldn't live this life, not because of constant danger, but because it demanded restraint, discipline, and the ability to wait while others rush toward their own downfall. Before we settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Only if you genuinely enjoy these long, slow journeys through history's darker corners. And if you're listening right now, drop a comment with your location and local time. I love knowing where these stories travel. Now dim the lights, let the city noise fade, and settle in as we ease into the calculated, watchful story of Joseph Lombardo. Joseph Lombardo grew up in the heart of Chicago, in a neighborhood where everyone knew each other, and yet, secrets traveled faster than the wind. From a young age, he learned that life wasn't always fair, that the streets carried lessons no school could teach. The city had a rhythm of its own, a pulse of opportunity and risk, and Joseph, even as a boy, felt its beat. He watched the older men move through life with a mixture of caution and confidence, taking chances that others wouldn't dare, and he admired the way they commanded respect without always raising their voices. He remembered afternoons spent on cracked sidewalks, tossing a ball or playing marbles with friends. But even then, there was a sense that life beyond those streets was a game that required careful strategy. Joseph listened more than he spoke, observed more than he participated, and gradually began to understand the subtle rules that governed every interaction. A nod here, a glance there, a whispered instruction, each held meaning far greater than it appeared. School was a mix of curiosity and constraint. He enjoyed learning, especially subjects that allowed him to see patterns and think ahead. But he also understood that some lessons weren't taught in classrooms. Life had its own curriculum, one that involved reading people, anticipating reactions, and recognizing the invisible boundaries that others respected or ignored. Joseph's intelligence wasn't flashy. It was quiet, the kind that noticed everything without drawing attention to itself. Family was central to his early life, shaping both his values and his ambitions. His parents worked tirelessly, teaching him discipline and responsibility, while also reminding him of the importance of loyalty and respect. These lessons weren't always easy to follow. Temptation and challenge were constant, but Joseph absorbed them, storing each experience like a seed that would grow over time. He learned that influence was as much about consistency and reliability as it was about strength, and he began to understand how trust could be built slowly and preserved carefully. By the time he reached his teenage years, Joseph's understanding of people had deepened. He recognized that appearances were often deceptive, that the confidence someone projected could hide uncertainty, and that small gestures often carried messages more potent than words. He developed a keen sense for reading situations, understanding the balance between action and restraint, and appreciating the nuances of loyalty and respect. It was as if he had an internal radar, alert to the shifts and signals that others often missed. The city itself seemed to nurture his growing awareness. Chicago was a place of constant motion. Markets bustling, neighborhoods alive with conversation, streets pulsing with activity. Joseph found both fascination and caution in this environment. He learned which paths to take, which streets offered opportunity, and which situations required patience. The city became a classroom in its own right, offering lessons in timing, perception, and the subtle art of influence. Friendships mattered, but Joseph understood that not every connection could be counted as true. He began to distinguish between those who sought to learn from him, share experiences with him, or contribute meaningfully to his life, and those who were driven by self-interest or impulse. He valued discretion, loyalty, and reliability, gradually forming a circle of friends who shared his outlook and approach to life. These early lessons in human behavior would become invaluable, shaping the way he navigated increasingly complex networks of people as he grew older. His adolescence also brought challenges, moments that tested both character and judgment. He observed mistakes, both his own and those of others, and he learned from each. Failure was never a permanent mark, but an opportunity to adapt, recalibrate, and refine strategy. Joseph discovered that patience, observation, and adaptability were as critical to success as courage or skill. In this way, even missteps became building blocks for a more nuanced understanding of life and human nature. By the time he entered young adulthood, Joseph Lombardo had developed a keen sense of situational awareness, an ability to anticipate consequences, and a strategic approach to relationships. He moved through life with a quiet confidence, grounded in observation, experience, and a growing understanding of influence. People noticed his calm presence, his thoughtful approach, and his ability to navigate challenges with grace and foresight. Work and ambition began to take center stage. Joseph understood that opportunity often arrived disguised as routine, and he cultivated the ability to recognize potential before others did. Timing, discretion, and calculated initiative became central to his actions. He valued reliability and consistency, knowing that trust once established could create doors that would otherwise remain closed. Family, community, and the city remained his anchor. He maintained a respect for tradition, a recognition of history, and an appreciation for the lessons passed down by those who had navigated life before him. These influences combined with his natural acumen to create a foundation of wisdom, one that balanced patience with initiative, observation with action, and discretion with influence. Joseph also recognized that influence was subtle. It wasn't about loud declarations or visible displays of power, but about perception, timing, and the respect earned through consistency. He moved through the world like a careful observer, aware that small choices could have ripple effects far beyond immediate comprehension. Each interaction, each gesture, and each decision became a calculated step in a broader strategy of life. Even at this stage, Joseph's curiosity remained vibrant. He studied patterns of behavior, anticipated reactions, and considered multiple outcomes before acting. He had learned that the most effective decisions were not made impulsively but through careful reflection, observation, and understanding of human nature. This approach allowed him to remain agile, adaptable, and perceptive, able to navigate both expected and unexpected challenges. By the end of his early years, Joseph Lombardo had become a figure defined by presence, awareness, and strategic thinking. He moved through life with quiet confidence, grounded in observation, experience, and the careful cultivation of trust. He had learned the subtle balance of patience, initiative, and discretion, setting the stage for the complex and influential life that lay ahead. And as he stepped forward into the wider world, Joseph carried with him the lessons of his youth: loyalty, observation, patience, and adaptability. These principles would guide him through challenges, shape his decisions, and define his path in ways both profound and enduring. The journey was only beginning, and the city, alive with possibilities, awaited his steps. Joseph Lombardo's transition from youth into young adulthood was defined by the careful balance between ambition, observation, and the relationships he had cultivated over the years. By the time he reached his late teens, he had already developed a subtle understanding of the unspoken codes that governed human behavior, especially in the neighborhoods where influence and reputation were as valuable as money or skill. He knew that patience, timing, and awareness were just as important as courage or initiative, and he began to apply these principles more deliberately as he navigated the opportunities and challenges that life presented. The city of Chicago had changed, and yet it remained constant in its rhythm. Streets that once seemed chaotic now revealed themselves as a network of patterns, each alley, corner, and neighborhood offering lessons in perception and strategy. Joseph would often walk these streets in quiet contemplation, noticing the behavior of people around him. The brief exchanges, the subtle gestures, the way tension could linger in the air unnoticed by those not attuned to it. Each observation added to his growing understanding of human dynamics, and he began to see the city not just as a place of movement, but as a living classroom where every interaction was an opportunity to learn. During this time, Joseph began working a series of jobs that introduced him to the practicalities of adult life and responsibility. These were not glamorous roles. They ranged from delivery work to assisting at small family-run businesses, but they offered a valuable perspective on how to manage people, resources, and time. He learned that reliability and consistency were often more respected than flashy skills, and that earning trust required quiet diligence over many months. Small tasks executed well could build reputations just as effectively as bold gestures. He also noticed the subtle hierarchy that existed in every workplace, understanding who influenced decisions, who commanded respect, and who acted with hidden motives. These observations would serve him well in the years ahead. Friendships continued to shape his perspective, but Joseph's approach to relationships grew more selective. While he maintained connections from his youth, he increasingly sought friends who displayed reliability, intelligence, and foresight. Loyalty, he understood, was earned and preserved through consistency, and he valued relationships where mutual trust was reinforced through action rather than words. At the same time, he learned to recognize when distance was necessary. Not all relationships were beneficial, and some could carry subtle risks or complications if not managed carefully. By his early 20s, Joseph Lombardo began to explore more ambitious avenues. He recognized that influence and opportunity were often intertwined, and he sought environments where he could expand both. While remaining cautious and observant, he began associating with groups of people whose ambitions matched his own. Here, the lessons of patience and perception became crucial. Decisions had to be weighed carefully, as one misstep could compromise trust or reputation. Joseph's natural intuition allowed him to navigate these complex dynamics, reading subtle signals and anticipating outcomes before they unfolded. Work and social environments provided a stage for Joseph to hone his strategic thinking. He understood that leadership was less about imposing control and more about influencing outcomes subtly. A word in the right moment, a gesture of support, or a discreet correction could shift situations more effectively than overt confrontation. He also learned that credibility was earned over time and that reputation was fragile. Every interaction carried weight, and he became adept at ensuring that his actions aligned with the persona of reliability and discretion he wished to cultivate. Financial opportunities began to emerge in ways that required not just effort but judgment. Joseph noticed that those who succeeded were often those who balanced boldness with prudence, risk-taking with calculation. He applied this lesson carefully, evaluating potential ventures not just for immediate gain but for long-term impact. He observed patterns, assessed risk, and identified avenues where patience and insight could produce disproportionate results. This strategic mindset became a defining aspect of his approach to life. At the same time, Joseph's understanding of perception deepened. He realized that influence was rarely about what one said or did openly. It was about the impressions created, the confidence projected, and the trust earned silently. People reacted not just to actions but to the sense of foresight and composure they perceived in others. Joseph honed his ability to project calm authority, making it clear that he was both capable and trustworthy without ever needing to assert dominance overtly. The subtle power of perception became a central pillar of his growing influence. His family remained an anchor, a reminder of values, history, and the importance of loyalty. Joseph remained close to those who shaped him, maintaining connections that provided grounding even as his ambitions expanded. He understood that relationships required effort and respect, and he balanced his professional and social pursuits with care for those who mattered most. The lessons learned at home, the value of integrity, the importance of observation, and the subtle power of trust remained at the core of his evolving approach to life. Even as responsibilities increased, Joseph found time for quiet reflection. Solitude became a space to process experiences, assess relationships, and anticipate future possibilities. The city, bustling with life around him, became both a backdrop and a partner in these reflections. Observing human behavior, he refined his understanding of trust, influence, and timing. He recognized patterns, noted deviations, and contemplated strategies that balanced patience with initiative. Each reflection reinforced his growing awareness and sharpened his capacity for deliberate action. By now, Joseph had also developed a nuanced understanding of risk. He saw that the most significant challenges rarely came in obvious forms. They emerged subtly in hesitation, in miscommunication, or in the quiet shifting of alliances. He learned to anticipate these shifts, adapt quickly, and use uncertainty strategically. Risk was no longer feared. It was understood, measured, and incorporated into decision-making. This approach allowed him to act decisively without being reckless, maintaining both opportunity and security simultaneously. Social perception, influence, and strategic action were now intertwined in Joseph's daily life. He had become a figure whose presence commanded attention without demanding it. People instinctively respected his insight, patience, and discretion. His reputation was built on years of careful observation, consistent behavior, and subtle demonstration of competence. He understood that every conversation, gesture, or decision could reinforce or weaken the web of trust he had cultivated, and he acted accordingly. By the mid-20s, Joseph's abilities were recognized by those with wider influence. He was invited into networks where ambition, strategy, and discretion were highly valued. Within these circles, he demonstrated not only intelligence and foresight, but also the capacity to navigate complex social and professional dynamics. His reputation as a reliable, observant, and strategic figure grew, opening doors to new opportunities that required both judgment and subtle influence. Yet, despite growing recognition and responsibility, Joseph never lost sight of his grounding principles. He remained attentive to family, loyal to friends, and committed to observing and understanding human behavior with nuance. He valued quiet observation as much as decisive action, knowing that mastery of perception was as important as mastery of circumstance. This balance would serve as the foundation for his expanding influence and achievements in the years to come. At this stage, Joseph Lombardo had evolved into a young man of remarkable awareness and capability. He balanced ambition with patience, influence with discretion, and initiative with reflection. The lessons of his youth, observation, loyalty, subtlety, and patience, had matured into tools he could wield with precision. He had learned that the world was rarely as simple as it appeared, that opportunities were often hidden in routine, and that success required both careful calculation and intuitive understanding. As he looked toward the future, Joseph sensed that life's complexities would only grow. New responsibilities, challenges, and opportunities awaited, each requiring the careful application of insight, judgment, and influence. He moved forward with confidence, aware that the journey ahead would test his skills, demand his adaptability, and reward his patience. Yet he was prepared, equipped with the knowledge, experience, and discernment that had guided him from his earliest days. And so, Joseph Lombardo stepped into the wider world, ready to navigate the intricate web of human relationships, opportunity, and consequence that defined the life he was building. Patient, observant, and determined to shape his path with wisdom, skill, and care. Joseph Lombardo's early adulthood had matured into a stage where his observations, instincts, and relationships began to yield tangible influence. The neighborhood streets of his youth, once lessons in patience and awareness, had prepared him for a world where every action had consequences, and every person he met was a node in a larger network. By now, Joseph had learned to read people with a subtlety that many admired but few could articulate. A glance, a hesitation, a tone of voice, each provided insight into intentions, moods, and potential opportunities. Chicago, sprawling and complex, continued to shape him. The city's pulse was steady, yet unpredictable, and Joseph had become attuned to its nuances. Markets thrived and declined, conversations in cafes hinted at larger currents, and even casual interactions in public spaces carried undercurrents of influence. He found that the ability to anticipate shifts, whether social, economic, or interpersonal, was a skill that gave him an advantage over those who acted impulsively. Timing, more than force, was becoming the measure of effectiveness in everything he pursued. By his late 20s, Joseph had established a foothold in multiple circles of influence. These weren't merely social networks. They were ecosystems of trust, loyalty, and reputation. Within them, every gesture mattered, Every commitment was remembered, and every misstep could have ramifications beyond immediate comprehension. Joseph's approach was measured. He built relationships slowly, observed carefully, and acted when the moment offered maximum advantage. He understood that true influence often went unnoticed by those outside the circle, functioning in ways that were invisible yet deeply effective. Friendship, loyalty, and trust became central pillars of his expanding role. Joseph recognized that while charm could open doors, reliability kept them open. Those around him learned that he was consistent, discreet, and observant. He cultivated an aura of quiet authority, one that encouraged cooperation rather than compliance, respect rather than fear. People gravitated toward him not because of overt power, but because of the confidence and foresight he projected. In every interaction, he considered both immediate and long-term effects, understanding that influence was cumulative, not instantaneous. Work and opportunity were no longer separated from strategy, they were intertwined. Joseph approached every endeavor with a mindset of careful analysis. He evaluated resources, anticipated reactions, and considered potential outcomes before committing to any course of action. He developed the ability to recognize subtle patterns in human behavior, discerning motivations that were not explicitly stated. This analytical skill allowed him to operate effectively in environments where miscalculation could be costly. While Joseph's influence was growing, he maintained a balance with family and personal life. The lessons instilled in him by his parents, the importance of loyalty, responsibility, and discretion, remained guiding principles. He valued connection over convenience, taking care to nurture relationships with those who had supported him from the beginning. The duality of his existence, public engagement and private reflection, was a constant, and he navigated it with deliberate intention. As he matured, Joseph also became increasingly aware of the subtleties of power and perception. He understood that influence was most effective when it was invisible. People acted according to their own understanding while being subtly guided by his presence and decisions. He learned that overt displays of authority often provoked resistance, whereas discreet direction allowed cooperation to unfold naturally. Mastery, he realized, was as much about understanding perception as it was about commanding action. Financial insight complemented Joseph's strategic awareness. He saw opportunities that others overlooked, recognizing that success often hinged on recognizing potential and managing risk carefully. Joseph assessed situations not only for immediate benefit but also for long-term sustainability, understanding that true stability required both prudence and foresight. His decisions were deliberate, guided by observation, experience, and an intuitive grasp of patterns in behavior and circumstance. The networks he built were not static. People changed, alliances shifted, and opportunities evolved. Joseph's ability to navigate these changes was grounded in his attentiveness. He observed small signals, slight changes in tone, subtle hesitations or adjustments in behavior that indicated shifts in loyalty or influence. By responding thoughtfully rather than impulsively, he maintained equilibrium and strengthened his position. His awareness of context, history, and nuance allowed him to act decisively while preserving relationships. Patience became a hallmark of his approach. Joseph understood that immediate gratification or reaction could undermine months of careful cultivation. He learned to wait for the right moment, to observe the unfolding of events, and to intervene strategically. Timing, he realized, was often more important than action itself. A well-timed decision could achieve results that forceful effort could not, and he honed this skill through observation, experience, and reflection. Despite growing influence and responsibility, Joseph remained grounded. Reflection, solitude, and careful thought were integral to his process. Late nights walking familiar streets allowed him to analyze interactions, evaluate strategies, and anticipate potential outcomes. The city, alive with motion and human interaction, became both a mirror and a teacher, offering lessons in observation, timing, and perception. These walks were moments of clarity, reinforcing the strategies and principles that guided his life. Joseph also recognized the importance of adaptability. The world was rarely predictable, and circumstances could change in subtle yet profound ways. He learned to remain flexible, adjusting his approach without compromising principles. Observation allowed him to detect these shifts early, and his analytical mindset enabled him to respond effectively. Adaptability, combined with foresight and patience, became a central component of his strategy for influence and stability. By now, Joseph Lombardo was seen by many as a figure of quiet authority. He had cultivated a reputation that was both respected and reliable. People trusted his judgment, sought his advice, and recognized his capacity to navigate complex situations with discretion. Influence had become both subtle and powerful, operating not through overt force but through consistency, insight, and strategic engagement. His approach to relationships and networks was deliberate. He understood that loyalty was earned through action, not words, and he consistently demonstrated reliability, fairness, and foresight. He also recognized that not every opportunity was worth pursuing, and he exercised discretion in choosing alliances and engagements. This selectivity reinforced his reputation and ensured that his influence remained focused and effective. Risk, ever present, was now assessed with nuance. Joseph recognized that the most significant challenges often arose from small, almost imperceptible shifts rather than dramatic events. He anticipated changes, evaluated potential consequences, and chose actions that preserved stability while allowing for growth and opportunity. Risk was no longer feared. It was analyzed, managed, and leveraged strategically to advance both personal and relational goals. Joseph's understanding of legacy began to deepen. He considered not only immediate outcomes but also how his actions would resonate in the lives of those around him. Relationships, reputation, and influence were all part of a long-term perspective, and he acted with awareness of the enduring impact of his decisions. This foresight shaped his approach to engagement, ensuring that choices were guided by both immediate and lasting considerations. Even amid growing responsibilities, Joseph valued curiosity and ongoing learning. Human behavior remained his primary study, and he continued to observe, analyze, and adapt. This intellectual engagement kept him agile, allowing him to anticipate challenges, recognize opportunities, and navigate the evolving dynamics of his world. Observation and insight remained central, reinforcing both his influence and his strategic acumen. By his early 30s, Joseph Lombardo had become a figure who balanced ambition, patience, and insight. His approach combined observation, discretion, and strategic action, allowing him to influence outcomes subtly yet effectively. He had cultivated networks, managed relationships, and established a reputation grounded in trust, reliability, and foresight. Influence was no longer aspirational. It was an active, practiced skill that shaped interactions and decisions across multiple spheres of life. The city, once a source of challenge and uncertainty, had become a partner in his growth. Streets that were once merely pathways now held meaning, offering lessons in timing, perception, and human behavior. Joseph moved through this environment with confidence, grounded in experience, observation, and the careful application of principles learned over years. The interplay of patience, strategic action, and human understanding defined both his approach and his effectiveness. As he prepared to take on increasingly significant roles in the broader networks he had joined, Joseph Lombardo carried with him the lessons of youth and early adulthood: loyalty, patience, observation, and strategic discretion. Each decision, each relationship, and each action was an opportunity to refine his influence, cultivate trust, and navigate complexity with skill and foresight. The path ahead promised challenge and opportunity, but Joseph was ready, equipped with the tools, insight, and experience necessary to shape his world carefully and deliberately. Joseph Lombardo's early 30s were a turning point, a period when his careful preparation, observation, and cultivated networks began to coalesce into tangible influence and opportunity. The skills he had refined over decades, observation, patience, strategic discretion, and the ability to read people, were now ready to be applied on a larger stage. Chicago itself, a city alive with commerce, ambition, and unspoken hierarchies, became the backdrop for his evolving role. The streets he had once navigated as a boy now felt familiar in a way that gave him both confidence and perspective. Every neighborhood, every intersection, every gathering place offered insight. He noticed how patterns repeated themselves. The way people gravitated toward those who exhibited calm authority, the subtle signs of hesitation or uncertainty, and the unspoken signals that dictated loyalty and respect. These lessons were no longer theoretical. They were tools he could use to guide interactions, influence decisions, and shape outcomes. Joseph's social circles had grown more complex. He was no longer just a participant, but increasingly a navigator, someone whose opinions and insights carried weight. People looked to him not for overt displays of dominance, but for guidance, reliability, and strategic insight. His ability to listen, to observe nuances, and to act at precisely the right moment allowed him to become an influential figure within these networks. The reputation he had built over years, quiet, consistent, observant, was now a foundation on which larger opportunities could be constructed. Professional opportunities were intertwined with his growing influence. Joseph had learned that success was rarely achieved in isolation. He began to engage in ventures that required coordination, foresight, and negotiation. These were often subtle interactions, arranging agreements, mediating disputes, and facilitating cooperation between parties who might otherwise act in opposition. His approach was never to impose control but to guide, using insight and discretion to achieve outcomes that were mutually beneficial yet aligned with his strategic vision. At the same time, he remained acutely aware of the fragility of trust and reputation. Relationships, once established, needed continuous attention to remain strong. Joseph balanced assertiveness with patience, ensuring that his actions reinforced reliability without appearing forceful. He recognized that influence worked best when people felt autonomous, even as their decisions aligned with his guidance. This subtlety became a hallmark of his approach, allowing him to expand impact without overt displays of power. Financial acumen became increasingly significant. Joseph understood that resources were not just assets but instruments of influence. He observed patterns in local commerce, identified opportunities others overlooked, and evaluated ventures for both risk and long-term sustainability. His decision-making reflected careful analysis. He considered both immediate consequences and the ripple effects that could unfold over months or years. By integrating strategic foresight with practical management, he cultivated stability while remaining poised to seize advantageous opportunities. The networks he engaged with were dynamic, shifting. With time and circumstance, Joseph learned to anticipate changes, alliances forming or dissolving, ambitions rising or fading, loyalties shifting subtly. He responded not with panic but with measured adaptation, adjusting his approach while maintaining the integrity of his influence. This adaptability allowed him to maintain equilibrium, ensuring that growth and opportunity did not come at the expense of stability or trust. Family remained a grounding force. Joseph valued the principles instilled in him from childhood: loyalty, consistency, discretion, and respect. These values guided decisions, informed judgment, and provided a reference point amid the complexities of expanding influence. He understood that personal connections could provide both support and perspective, and he nurtured relationships with care, balancing professional engagement with familial commitment. Observation became a deliberate practice, a cornerstone of his strategy. Joseph spent time reflecting on interactions, analyzing patterns, and considering potential outcomes. The city itself provided a canvas for this analysis. Crowds in the marketplace, conversations in cafes, and gatherings in community spaces all offered insight. He honed the ability to detect subtle shifts, anticipate behaviors, and act with precision. This attentiveness reinforced his strategic advantage, allowing him to operate effectively in complex social and professional environments. Patience remained central. Joseph recognized that the most meaningful opportunities often required waiting, observing, and acting at precisely the right moment. Impulsive action could undermine months of careful cultivation, while delayed intervention could create openings for others. Timing, he realized, was a skill as critical as intelligence or effort. By learning to wait, watch, and intervene strategically, he maximized impact while minimizing risk. Influence, now more clearly defined, extended beyond immediate circles. Joseph's reputation for discretion and insight allowed him to mediate conflicts, guide decisions, and foster cooperation in situations where outcomes were uncertain. He understood that true power often lay in invisibility, shaping decisions and actions without requiring overt assertion of authority. This approach allowed him to expand his impact without provoking resistance or attracting unnecessary attention. Even as his influence grew, Joseph remained reflective. Solitude provided space to evaluate choices, anticipate challenges, and refine strategies. Late evenings spent walking familiar streets offered clarity, allowing him to reconcile ambition with principle, strategy with discretion. These reflective periods reinforced the balance that defined his approach, ensuring that decisions were informed, deliberate, and aligned with long-term objectives. Adaptability became increasingly critical. Joseph understood that circumstances, relationships, and opportunities were fluid. Success depended on the ability to respond effectively to change, maintaining stability while pursuing advancement. By observing subtle shifts and adjusting strategies accordingly, he ensured that his influence remained resilient, capable of navigating both expected and unexpected challenges. Mentorship began to play a role. Joseph's growing experience positioned him to guide others, sharing insight while allowing ments to develop autonomy. He recognized that cultivating competence and trust in others strengthened his networks and amplified his impact. Teaching, advising, and guiding became extensions of his influence, reinforcing relationships while expanding reach. By the mid-30s, Joseph Lombardo had solidified his role as a figure of strategic authority. His presence commanded respect, his judgment was sought, and his ability to navigate complexity became widely recognized. Influence was no longer just a personal skill. It was a force that shaped decisions, guided interactions, and enabled the careful orchestration of opportunities across multiple domains. Yet, Joseph remained grounded in principles. Loyalty, discretion, patience, and observation continued to inform every action. He understood that power without wisdom, or influence without trust, was fragile. By maintaining these principles, he ensured that his growing influence was durable, resilient, and respected. Looking forward, Joseph recognized that the next stage of life would require integrating experience, observation, and insight into larger, more complex operations. The lessons of youth and early adulthood, observation, strategic patience, loyalty, and discretion, would now serve as the foundation for broader impact. He prepared to navigate challenges and opportunities with a blend of foresight, adaptability, and calm authority, ready to shape the next chapter of his life with deliberate purpose. As Joseph Lombardo stepped confidently into the expanding landscape of his influence, he carried with him the accumulated wisdom of years spent observing, reflecting, and strategizing. The city, alive with motion and subtle complexity, offered both challenges and opportunities. Joseph was ready, equipped with the skills, insight, and discernment to navigate them with precision, shaping outcomes while maintaining integrity and fostering trust. Joseph Lombardo's mid-30s marked the beginning of a period where his careful preparation, observation, and cultivated relationships began to bear tangible fruit. By now, he had accumulated years of insight into human behavior, social dynamics, and the subtle currents of influence that flowed through the city of Chicago. These lessons had become internalized, forming a framework that guided both thought and action in a way that was deliberate, strategic, and effective. The city itself, alive with movement and opportunity, was a constant teacher. Streets and neighborhoods that had once seemed chaotic now revealed patterns of behavior, cycles of opportunity, and networks of influence. Joseph understood that these patterns were not static. They shifted with the ambitions, moods, and decisions of the people who populated them. By paying close attention to these shifts, he could anticipate trends, identify opportunities, and position himself in ways that maximized both influence and advantage. Joseph's circle of influence had expanded considerably. He now operated within multiple networks simultaneously, each with its own hierarchy, codes, and dynamics. Navigating these networks required careful observation, nuanced judgment, and the ability to manage multiple relationships with discretion. Joseph had developed a keen sense for identifying individuals who could be trusted, allies who could advance shared goals, and potential conflicts that required careful mediation. In all interactions, he prioritized understanding over reaction, strategy over impulse. Loyalty, reliability, and discretion had become hallmarks of his reputation. People trusted Joseph not only because of what he could accomplish, but also because of the integrity with which he approached every relationship and every opportunity. His presence inspired confidence, his counsel was sought, and his judgment was respected. This credibility, built over years of consistent behavior, became one of his most valuable assets, allowing him to influence outcomes in subtle but significant ways. As Joseph navigated these networks, he also began to engage in more significant ventures, combining his knowledge, resources, and strategic acumen to create value and opportunity. These were not ventures defined solely by immediate gain. They were designed with foresight, taking into account long-term sustainability, risk management, and the cultivation of relationships. Each decision was carefully weighed, considering both the immediate consequences and the ripple effects that could influence future opportunities. Financial acumen became increasingly important. During this period, Joseph had learned to view resources not merely as tools for personal benefit but as instruments of influence. Capital, connections, and reputation could all be leveraged strategically to create advantageous outcomes. He assessed opportunities for both potential gain and risk, balancing ambition with prudence. By integrating careful analysis with a deep understanding of human behavior, Joseph positioned himself to act decisively when opportunities aligned with his strategic vision. One of the key aspects of Joseph's evolving role was his ability to mediate and coordinate among diverse groups. Conflict was inevitable in any environment where multiple ambitions intersected, but Joseph had a talent for resolving disputes in ways that preserved relationships and reinforced trust. He recognized that influence was most effective when it operated quietly, shaping decisions and guiding outcomes without overt assertion of control. This approach allowed him to navigate complex social landscapes with minimal friction and maximum effect. Observation remained a central practice in Joseph's life. Even as his responsibilities and influence grew, he dedicated time to studying human behavior, analyzing interactions, and reflecting on the outcomes of decisions. The city served as a dynamic laboratory, offering lessons in perception, timing, and influence. Crowds in marketplaces, conversations in cafes, and gatherings in social spaces provided insight into emerging trends, shifts in alliances, and the subtle interplay of ambition and opportunity. Joseph's attentiveness allowed him to act with foresight, often anticipating developments before they became apparent to others. Adaptability was another critical component of Joseph's strategy. Circumstances changed constantly, alliances shifted, and opportunities evolved. Joseph had learned that rigid adherence to plans could lead to missed chances or unforeseen complications. By remaining flexible and responsive, he maintained stability while positioning himself to seize advantageous opportunities. Adaptability, combined with strategic patience and acute observation, became a hallmark of his effectiveness. Mentorship and guidance also emerged as an important aspect of Joseph's role. His experience and insight positioned him to advise others, fostering competence, trust, and reliability within his networks. By cultivating the abilities of those around him, he strengthened the overall cohesion and effectiveness of his circle. This approach reinforced relationships, expanded influence, and ensured that his impact extended beyond his immediate actions. Patience continued to be a defining virtue. Joseph recognized that significant achievements often required waiting for the right moment, observing patterns, and intervening strategically. Impulsive action could compromise months of preparation, while careful timing amplified the impact of each decision. He had learned to balance ambition with deliberation, allowing opportunity to unfold naturally while remaining prepared to act decisively when conditions were optimal. Joseph's reputation for discretion and strategic thinking now extended across multiple spheres of influence. People recognized that he could be relied upon not only for judgment but also for integrity and consistency. This reputation allowed him to navigate sensitive situations, broker agreements, and guide outcomes without resorting to overt displays of authority. Influence, he understood, was most potent when it was subtle, respected, and reinforced by trust. The networks he engaged with were not static. They were dynamic, influenced by shifting ambitions, emerging opportunities, and changing circumstances. Joseph monitored these changes carefully, responding with measured action that preserved relationships while advancing strategic objectives. By maintaining awareness of both micro and macro dynamics, he was able to navigate complexity effectively, ensuring that his influence remained resilient and enduring. Family remained a grounding influence amidst expanding responsibilities. Joseph valued the principles instilled in him during childhood: loyalty, integrity, patience, and discretion, and integrated these values into every aspect of his life. He understood that personal connections provided not only emotional support but also a framework for ethical and strategic decision-making. Maintaining these relationships required effort, attention, and consistency, and Joseph prioritized them alongside his professional and social endeavors. Reflection and solitude continued to play a crucial role. Joseph frequently set aside time to analyze past decisions, anticipate future developments, and refine strategies. These moments of introspection allowed him to maintain clarity, balance ambition with principle, and reinforce the strategic frameworks he relied upon. Walking through familiar neighborhoods or observing the city's rhythms provided insight, perspective, and inspiration for his ongoing endeavors. By his late 30s, Joseph Lombardo had established himself as a central figure in multiple networks of influence. His presence commanded respect, his judgment was sought, and his ability to navigate complexity with discretion and insight was widely recognized. He had cultivated a reputation for reliability, strategic foresight, and subtle influence, allowing him to shape outcomes, guide interactions, and manage relationships effectively. Even as influence and responsibility expanded, Joseph remained committed to the principles that had guided him from youth: observation, patience, loyalty, and discretion. He understood that these principles were not merely personal virtues but essential tools for maintaining stability, trust, and long-term impact. By integrating these values with strategic insight and adaptability, he ensured that his growing influence was both effective and enduring. As Joseph prepared to enter the next phase of his life, he recognized that greater challenges, opportunities, and responsibilities lay ahead. The foundations he had built, networks of trust, reputation for integrity, strategic insight, and disciplined observation, would allow him to navigate these complexities with confidence. He approached the future with a combination of patience, foresight, and adaptability, ready to shape outcomes, influence decisions, and leave a lasting mark on the networks and communities he had long studied and carefully nurtured. With experience, insight, and relationships guiding him, Joseph Lombardo stepped confidently into this new chapter, aware that influence was not simply about control or dominance but about understanding, timing, and the ability to guide without forcing. The city, dynamic and complex, offered both challenges and opportunities, and Joseph was prepared to meet them with skill, discretion, and the strategic patience that had become the hallmark of his approach to life. Joseph Lombardo's late 30s marked the beginning of a new era in which his carefully cultivated skills, relationships, and reputation began to translate into true authority within Chicago's interconnected networks. What had once been observation, patience, and quiet maneuvering was now becoming action informed by foresight and experience. He had matured into a figure whose influence was acknowledged by those both within and beyond his immediate circles, and he recognized that the next phase required consolidation, subtle expansion, and strategic foresight. The city itself, constantly shifting yet familiar, remained both a challenge and an ally. Streets that had once seemed chaotic now revealed their hidden order. Joseph could perceive subtle rhythms, the way resources flowed through neighborhoods, the patterns of human interaction in social and professional settings, and the quiet undercurrents of competition and ambition. By understanding these patterns, he could anticipate outcomes and position himself advantageously. These insights were not just theoretical. They became actionable strategies that guided his decisions and interactions with precision. Joseph's network of relationships had grown both in breadth and complexity. He moved fluidly among circles where influence was as much about discretion and reliability as it was about visibility. People trusted him not simply because of who he was, but because of the consistency of his actions and the clarity of his judgment. His reputation as someone who could be relied upon without question allowed him to mediate disputes, broker opportunities, and guide outcomes in a way that was both subtle and profoundly effective. He understood that real influence often operated invisibly, shaping decisions and behaviors without overt displays of authority. At this stage, financial acumen became an increasingly important tool. Joseph understood that resources were more than currency. They were instruments for creating opportunity and influence. He began to identify avenues where investments of effort, time, or capital could yield strategic advantage beyond immediate financial return. Evaluating risk became a refined skill. He assessed the potential outcomes, weighed long-term consequences, and acted decisively when circumstances aligned with both strategic vision and practical feasibility. Joseph's ability to anticipate and manage risk set him apart. He recognized that the greatest challenges rarely arose in dramatic, obvious forms. They emerged subtly. A hesitation in a conversation, a small shift in allegiance, or a ripple from an unnoticed decision. By remaining attentive to these subtleties, Joseph could respond proactively, neutralizing potential issues before they grew into significant obstacles. Adaptability, combined with foresight and patience, became central to his method, allowing him to navigate the complexities of multiple social and professional networks simultaneously. Mentorship and influence began to extend outward. Joseph recognized that nurturing competence, loyalty, and reliability in others strengthened the cohesion and effectiveness of his networks. By advising, guiding, and supporting key individuals, he ensured that his impact multiplied without requiring constant direct intervention. This approach reinforced trust, cultivated loyalty, and expanded his sphere of influence while maintaining discretion and subtlety. It was a delicate balance, requiring attentiveness, patience, and strategic insight, but Joseph had honed these abilities over decades. Relationships continued to anchor Joseph's decisions and actions. Loyalty, a value instilled from childhood, remained central. He carefully maintained connections that were important personally and strategically, understanding that influence was inseparable from trust. At the same time, he continued to exercise discernment, recognizing when distance or selective engagement was necessary. Maintaining balance between personal and professional life required effort and reflection, and Joseph applied himself conscientiously to both. Observation, reflection, and analysis remained daily practices. Joseph devoted time to studying human behavior, evaluating interactions, and refining strategies. The city itself became a laboratory. Crowds, casual conversations, and gatherings offered insights into emerging patterns, shifts in allegiance, and opportunities for influence. These periods of reflection reinforced the strategic clarity he had cultivated over the years, ensuring that decisions were not impulsive but informed, deliberate, and aligned with long-term objectives. During this phase, Joseph's reputation for strategic foresight and discretion became widely acknowledged. People sought his counsel, trusted his judgment, and deferred to his insights in complex situations. Influence, he understood, was most powerful when it operated quietly, shaping decisions and guiding outcomes without overt assertion of control. He had learned that subtlety and patience often yielded more lasting results than force or direct intervention. Joseph also recognized the importance of timing in consolidating influence. Opportunities often presented themselves gradually, requiring patience, vigilance, and precise action. He learned to wait for the optimal moment to engage, to leverage relationships, and to advance strategic goals. Impatience could compromise months of preparation, while carefully timed action amplified impact. Timing, coupled with insight and discretion, became a key component of his success. Family remained an essential grounding force. Joseph maintained close connections, valuing the guidance, support, and perspective that family relationships provided. These bonds reinforced his ethical framework, reminding him that influence and responsibility carried consequences beyond immediate ambition. By integrating familial values with strategic action, he ensured that decisions were informed by principle as well as practical consideration. By now, Joseph had begun consolidating influence in key areas, strengthening alliances with individuals and networks whose objectives aligned with his own. He recognized that lasting success depended not on dominance alone, but on creating a network of mutual trust, shared goals, and coordinated action. Relationships were cultivated carefully, each interaction reinforcing reliability and strategic alignment. Alliances were not static. They required attention, adaptation, and ongoing cultivation. Observation and patience continued to guide Joseph's approach. He assessed the impact of each interaction, monitored subtle shifts in relationships, and adjusted strategies as necessary. The city's complex social fabric provided endless opportunities for insight. The subtleties of conversation, the nuances of decision-making, and the rhythms of daily life all offered data for informed action. By integrating observation with strategic judgment, Joseph maintained a clear advantage over those who acted impulsively or without foresight. Joseph's influence was now both subtle and substantial. He could shape outcomes without overt control, guide decisions without imposing authority, and cultivate trust without demanding loyalty. His network, reinforced through careful observation, strategic guidance, and consistent reliability, allowed him to operate effectively across multiple spheres of influence simultaneously. By balancing discretion with action, insight with initiative, he maintained both stability and growth. Even as his role expanded, Joseph remained committed to continuous learning. Human behavior, societal patterns, and emerging opportunities required ongoing observation and adaptation. Solitude, reflection, and analysis remained integral to his approach, ensuring that each decision was informed, deliberate, and aligned with both short-term objectives and long-term strategy. This commitment to learning reinforced his adaptability and strategic foresight, allowing him to navigate challenges and seize opportunities with precision. By the end of this phase, Joseph Lombardo had become a central figure in Chicago's networked landscape. His reputation for reliability, insight, and discretion was well established. Influence, carefully cultivated over decades, allowed him to shape outcomes, guide relationships, and navigate complex social and professional dynamics with subtlety and effectiveness. He had transformed observation, patience, and strategic judgment into actionable power. Looking ahead, Joseph recognized that the next phase would require further consolidation of influence, careful management of relationships, and strategic foresight in navigating larger challenges. Opportunities for expansion and collaboration were abundant, but they demanded careful assessment, timing, and the continued application of principles that had guided him from youth. Observation, patience, loyalty, discretion, and strategic insight. Joseph Lombardo stepped forward with confidence, equipped with decades of experience, deep understanding of human behavior, and the strategic acumen necessary to expand influence while preserving trust. The city remained a dynamic and complex environment, offering both challenges and opportunities. Joseph was prepared to navigate them with deliberate precision, patience, and foresight, ready to shape outcomes and build a lasting legacy of influence and respect. Joseph Lombardo's early 40s marked a period of both consolidation and expansion. By now, he had mastered the subtle art of influence, learning not only to read people, but also to anticipate the complex web of interactions that shaped outcomes in Chicago's social and professional circles. This was a time when patience, discretion, and foresight converged, allowing him to take steps that were both strategic and deeply impactful. The city's streets, once a chaotic backdrop to his youth, had become an intricate landscape of opportunity. Joseph understood the rhythms of its neighborhoods, the ebb and flow of commerce, and the hidden currents of social influence that few others noticed. Every interaction, no matter how small, carried information, signals of loyalty, hesitation, ambition, and potential cooperation. By observing carefully and acting with precision, He could shape outcomes without overt control, guiding events in ways that often went unnoticed but had lasting consequences. Joseph's network of relationships had grown exponentially. He was now recognized as a central figure in multiple circles, someone whose judgment was respected, whose counsel was sought, and whose presence carried weight. His approach was never about dominance or force. Rather, it was about guiding, mediating, and influencing outcomes through trust and reliability. People around him learned that decisions made in concert with Joseph were likely to yield stability and opportunity, which enhanced his reputation and reinforced the loyalty of those in his network. Strategic partnerships became a critical focus. Joseph recognized that alliances were most effective when they were mutually beneficial, based on respect, shared objectives, and long-term vision. He began to identify key individuals whose strengths complemented his own and whose networks could amplify influence. These partnerships were carefully cultivated, often through subtle gestures of trust, small favors, and consistent reliability. Each alliance was a building block, reinforcing both his credibility and his capacity to shape outcomes across multiple spheres of influence. Financial insight and strategic investment played a role in strengthening his position. Joseph had learned that resources were not simply assets but instruments of opportunity. By leveraging capital, influence, and reputation in tandem, he created pathways for cooperation, mutual gain, and stability. Each financial decision was approached with both caution and foresight. Immediate gains were weighed against long-term sustainability, and risks were assessed not only for their direct impact but also for their potential ripple effects within his network. Observation remained at the core of his method. Joseph spent time analyzing interactions, listening closely to conversations, and noting subtleties in behavior. The smallest gestures, a pause, a tone of voice, a glance, could reveal intentions, uncertainties, or opportunities. This attentiveness allowed him to act proactively, responding to subtle shifts before they escalated into challenges or were exploited by others. His ability to interpret these signals provided a strategic advantage that reinforced his growing influence. Conflict management became another area where Joseph excelled. In any environment where ambition and opportunity intersected, disagreements and misunderstandings were inevitable. Joseph's approach was to mediate with discretion, ensuring that outcomes preserved relationships and reinforced trust. By resolving disputes in ways that satisfied multiple parties, he solidified his position as a dependable guide, someone capable of navigating complexity without creating division. Adaptability continued to define his effectiveness. Circumstances, alliances, and opportunities were constantly evolving, and Joseph had learned to adjust strategies without compromising core principles. Flexibility allowed him to respond to unexpected changes, capitalize on new opportunities, and maintain equilibrium in the face of uncertainty. His adaptability, combined with patience and strategic insight, made him a formidable figure in any context. Mentorship and guidance became more pronounced during this phase. Joseph understood that cultivating competence, reliability, and trust in others strengthened the overall network and ensured the durability of his influence. He advised emerging leaders, shared insight, and provided subtle guidance, all while allowing individuals to exercise autonomy. This approach multiplied his impact, extended his reach, and reinforced loyalty across the network. Timing remained critical. Joseph had learned that opportunity often required waiting, observing, and acting at precisely the right moment. Impulsivity could undo months of preparation, while careful timing amplified effectiveness. He applied this principle consistently, ensuring that each action, intervention, or suggestion achieved maximum strategic benefit. Joseph's personal life remained a source of grounding and perspective. Family, values, and early lessons in loyalty, integrity, and discretion continued to inform his approach. Maintaining these connections provided emotional support and a framework for ethical and practical decision-making, reinforcing the balance between ambition and principle. By the mid-40s, Joseph had achieved a level of influence that extended well beyond his immediate networks. His reputation for reliability, insight, and strategic judgment was widely recognized. People deferred to his guidance, sought his counsel, and respected his ability to navigate complex interactions with discretion and foresight. Influence had become a tool carefully wielded to shape outcomes, manage relationships, and build sustainable opportunities. Even as responsibilities grew, Joseph continued to prioritize reflection and learning, observing human behavior, analyzing outcomes, and refining strategies remained daily practices. These moments of reflection allowed him to maintain clarity, anticipate challenges, and ensure that his decisions were deliberate, informed, and aligned with long-term objectives. Joseph's ability to integrate observation, strategy, patience, and discretion allowed him to consolidate influence while expanding his reach. He understood that true power did not require overt control. It operated through trust, credibility, and the subtle shaping of decisions and actions. By reinforcing reliability and fostering cooperation, he created a network capable of achieving objectives efficiently and sustainably. The city, with all its complexity and opportunity, became both a stage and a laboratory. Joseph used it to test strategies, observe human behavior, and refine approaches. The rhythms of daily life, the interactions of diverse groups, and the flow of resources all provided insights that informed decisions and strengthened influence. By remaining attuned to these dynamics, he maintained a strategic advantage over those who acted without foresight or subtlety. As Joseph approached his late 40s, he recognized that the next stage of influence would require careful navigation of larger challenges, strategic partnerships, and broader networks. He was now equipped with decades of experience, a deep understanding of human behavior, and the ability to act with discretion, foresight, and patience. With each interaction, alliance, and decision, Joseph Lombardo continued to refine his approach. Influence was no longer aspirational. It had become an active, practiced skill that shaped events, guided relationships, and created opportunity. He moved through his world with confidence, strategic clarity, and the patience to wait for the right moment to act. Joseph Lombardo's later years were a culmination of decades of careful observation, strategic patience, and quietly cultivated influence. By the time he reached his 50s, he had become a central figure in Chicago's networked world, not through force or overt control, but through the consistent application of insight, discretion, and trust. People sought his counsel, deferred to his judgment, and relied on his ability to navigate complex situations with subtlety and effectiveness. Throughout his life, Joseph had learned that true influence was built on relationships and reputation. Loyalty, integrity, and patience were not just personal virtues. They were the foundation for long-lasting impact. He had guided decisions, resolved conflicts, and created opportunities, all while maintaining the delicate balance between visibility and subtlety. Those who knew him respected the way he could shape outcomes without demanding dominance, fostering cooperation instead of division, and inspiring confidence through reliability. Financial acumen and strategic foresight allowed him to secure resources not for personal gain alone, but as tools to support alliances, strengthen networks, and reinforce trust. His ability to anticipate shifts, recognize patterns, and respond with measured action ensured that the relationships and structures he built remained resilient over time. Adaptability became a defining characteristic. Joseph navigated change with poise, maintaining stability while leveraging emerging opportunities. Family and personal values continued to ground him. Joseph understood that the principles instilled in his youth, loyalty, discretion, and respect, were more than guiding ideals. They were the lens through which he measured every decision. Balancing ambition with principle, he ensured that his influence extended not just outward into networks of power, but inward toward the people and values that mattered most. Reflection remained a constant companion. Late nights walking familiar streets, observing the rhythms of the city, and considering the consequences of past actions allowed Joseph to refine his judgment and preserve the clarity of his vision. Every decision, every interaction, and every alliance was approached with care, patience, and an understanding of the long-term impact. By the end of his journey, Joseph Lombardo's life exemplified the power of subtlety, patience, and insight. He had built a legacy not through force, but through understanding of people, of opportunity, and of timing. His influence endured because it was grounded in trust, consistency, and a deep awareness of human nature. In a city defined by ambition and complexity, Joseph had mastered the art of navigating its currents, leaving a mark that was felt quietly but profoundly across every circle he touched. He had shown that true leadership and lasting influence come not from dominance or visibility, but from the ability to listen, observe, anticipate, and guide with wisdom and integrity. And in that, Joseph Lombardo's story became a testament to the enduring power of discretion, patience, and strategic foresight. The city moved on, as it always had, but the subtle patterns he had shaped, the trust he had fostered, and the principles he had lived by continued to ripple quietly, leaving an imprint that would be remembered long after the streets he once walked had changed. Joseph Lombardo's story, from careful observation as a youth to a respected figure of influence, closes as a reflection on strategy, patience, and enduring legacy.